Alright, so a number of leaks were posted on 4chan in regards to future Marvel projects, including Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Avengers Infinity War, and general future Marvel Studios information. I'll be doing breakdowns of all the leaked info, so be sure to check out all of those videos. I'll be linking all of them in the middle of your screen. As always, be sure to take what I'm about to tell you with a grain of salt, and I'll be warning you about potential spoilers just in case any of this stuff actually makes it to the screen. Now before I get into this, I also want to point out that James Gunn recently claimed on Twitter that almost everything in this leak is fake, but because he didn't specify which points in this post were the half-lucky guesses, I'm still going to break down everything in the post just in case. So according to the leaks, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is pretty standalone from the rest of the MCU per James Gunn's demands. Out of all the leaks mentioned in this post, I think this one is the most likely to be true, just because James Gunn has talked a bunch of times in the past in a bunch of different interviews that he wants the Guardians of the Galaxy movies to be their own thing, and to not have too much to do with the Avengers or the rest of the MCU. Now we know that they're going to team up with the Avengers in Infinity War, as confirmed by Vin Diesel, but until that point, I think the Guardians are actually going to keep to themselves. The post then says that Ego is made out to be the main villain at first, but it's actually Aisha, although Ego is also an antagonist. Taserface serves as a secondary foe. Now as far as the first point in this goes, I can kind of see how this would work out, since I'm sure there's going to be some kind of misunderstanding when the Guardians first run into Ego, but I don't know how much of a misunderstanding there will be or how long that misunderstanding will last. Apparently there's a scene that was shown at Comic-Con where Star-Lord and Ego have a kind of humorous first encounter, like this reveal moment when he finds out Ego's his dad, and the tone of the scene doesn't exactly sound very confrontational. Now does that mean Ego won't be an antagonist in some way later in the movie? Of course not, but it does kind of take away some of the believability of this point regardless. As far as Aisha being an enemy, that sounds like something that would fit with her character, but I don't necessarily think that's where they're going to be heading with this movie. And Taserface from the get-go sounded like a new Ravager anyway, so it's not really hard to believe that he'd be a secondary villain, kind of like the Ravagers were in the last movie.
Steal my money!
Stop it! Leave him alone!
When I picked you up as a kid, these boys wanted to eat you.
The leaks also claim that Sylvester Stallone and Sharon Stone are playing members of the Ancients, a race of immortal aliens that hire the Guardians of the Galaxy to stop Ego as part of a bigger plan masterminded by Aisha. Now James Gunn actually released a video on Facebook that confirms a few of the things this post mentions, and we'll talk about those a little bit later, but in the video, Gunn actually doesn't confirm whether or not Stallone is going to be playing one of the Ancients, or rather what I think the poster was trying to say, the Elders of the Universe, like the Collector. Instead, Gunn simply says,
we know that Sylvester Stallone is playing someone in the film, we don't know who.
Which of course could mean anything at this point, so we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. Alright, so the post goes on to say that Yondu and Nebula are joining the team alongside Mantis, who is Star-Lord's half-sister and a prisoner of Ego. Now we do know that all three of these characters are going to be in the movie, and James Gunn did say in his video that Yondu and Nebula are going to have bigger roles in this one than they did in the first Guardians.
We know that Mantis is in the movie. We know that Yondu and Nebula have more important roles in the film,
but we don't know for sure whether or not they'll officially join the team. Personally, I think it's pretty easy to tell that Mantis will join up, but I think Yondu and Nebula will too, because we've seen concept art already that makes it look like the movie is going to go in that direction. As far as Mantis being a prisoner of Ego, I can see why this would be true from a storytelling perspective, because it could be an easy way to get the Guardians, and more importantly Star-Lord, in the same room with Ego, so we can get the film's Empire Strikes Back moment, and then we can go from there. At the same time though, remember I said earlier that I don't really believe Ego's going to be the villain, or at least as big a villain as this post tried to make it seem. Now as far as the first point in this goes, I can kind of see how this would work out, since I'm sure there's going to be some kind of misunderstanding when the Guardians first run into Ego, but I don't know how much of a misunderstanding there will be or how long that misunderstanding will last. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit hard to think of how that prisoner thing is going to go, especially since he didn't try to take Star-Lord or his mother prisoner all those years ago. We also see that the Nova Corps will supposedly make an appearance, and that the Kree will also have a larger role. Now this one I think could be true simply because Gunn did say in the past that he wanted to put more focus on the alien races and see how their cultures work. So if he kept up that idea, then we might get a few scenes of the Guardians on a bunch of different planets interacting with all of these different races and cultures on a more personal level. Kind of like when they went to nowhere and they were wandering around for a while before they ended up in that bar while they were waiting for the Collector. The post also says that Groot is going to remain child-sized for a large portion of the movie. This is another point that Gunn brought up in his Facebook video, but this time it was one that he actually confirmed, stating that Baby Groot would not be an adult in this movie.
We know Baby Groot is in the movie, that he's not an adult.
Moving on, the post claims that there's a minor romantic subplot between Star-Lord and Gamora following the seeds planted in the first movie. Again, this is something I can see happening, since they kind of played with the idea throughout the first movie, but at the same time, I can see Gunn deciding not to go through with it. If you remember, almost every single time Star-Lord and Gamora had a stereotypical romantic moment, it was usually either turned into a joke or it turned out to be a trick for some reason. So who knows? Personally, I'd like it better if they didn't go through with the romantic subplot, but then again, I'm not the director, so I can't call the shots. It then says that both Thanos and the Infinity Stones won't appear in this movie, but they will be referenced. Again, this is something James Gunn's talked about in the past, ever since it was first announced there was going to be a sequel. It's not exactly news, but it does make the next point kinda interesting. It then says the ending of the movie leads directly to Avengers Infinity War. Now, this is something that's throwing a lot of the goodwill credibility off of this leak, because again, in James Gunn's video, he mentioned that Guardians 2 would take place 2 months after the first movie.
We know that the movie takes place 2 months after the first movie ends.
It'd be way too condensed and forced to have Infinity War happen that soon after the events of Guardians 1, especially since basic math says otherwise. Remember, Civil War happened in 2016, as confirmed by a line from the Vision relatively early on in that movie.
In the 8 years since Mr. Stark announced himself as Iron Man, in the 8 years...
And Guardians of the Galaxy took place mostly in 2014. So the only way I could see the ending of Guardians 2 leading into Infinity War is if it had something like how Guardians 1 started, like a big time jump or something like that. But this seems like one of the weaker points in this leak, and I think we could probably just throw this one out entirely. And finally, the post states that there are plans for a sequel, but James Gunn still isn't officially attached to write and direct, although Marvel wants him to. Again, this is pretty much a no-brainer, since this is something a lot of people have been convinced about ever since the first Guardians turned out to be a big success, and it'd be a little weird at this point if a third one wasn't in talks at Marvel yet, or if it had been talked about, that James Gunn's name hadn't been tossed around yet. But like I said, it's a no-brainer, it's not exactly world-breaking news, and I think this is something that everybody pretty much universally agreed on since the first movie came out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to click that like button, maybe leave me a comment while you're at it, and go ahead and click that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to check out any of my social media pages. I've got a Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. All those links are going to be in the description below. And I've also got my last video right there in the middle of your screen. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and click it, check it out. Alright, and I will see you all next time.